Let's get started.
Gravitas, co-presented by Skoda Superb, best in next class. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist.
India has finally said what should have been said aloud months ago. It cannot be business as usual with China. The relationship is significantly damaged. China has failed to explain its provocations. It has given 5 different explanations. It has not kept its word and cannot explain why it attacked Indian soldiers. These are the words of India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, significant on their own, even more when you view them in the current context. America counts India among its major strategic allies. Russia says India is a major pole in the multipolar world. India's army chief is in the Gulf to work on military partnerships there. India has closer ties with France and Israel. On Gravitas tonight, we examine the changing global power equations and India's place in the post-pandemic world order. Also on the show, a very important story. If there's only one that you watch tonight, let this be the one. Mired in poverty and hunger, struck by hunger, people are eating dirt. We bring you a special report on the sand eaters of Madagascar. The rich-poor divide manifests itself in everything. 9 out of 10 people in low-income countries will not get a vaccine because rich countries are hoarding them. Australia has begun a probe on far-right extremism. Top intelligence officials say 40% of their cases are white supremacists. And football racism in focus again. A Champions League match is halted halfway after a match official allegedly makes a racist comment. We'll bring you a report. We begin, as always, with Gravitas Global Headlines.
UK regulators have issued a warning for the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine.
As an illustration to this, I may share with the committees that even last evening we were looking at 2 case reports of allergic reactions.
Saying people who have a history of significant allergic reactions should not currently receive the vaccine after 2 people who got the jab on Tuesday experienced allergic reactions. President Vladimir Putin has signed a law that allows Russia's national legislation to take precedence over international treaties and rulings from international bodies in cases when they conflict with the Russian constitution. The Kremlin, however, has assured that Russia's obligations under international treaties remain in force. India's National Investigation Agency, the NIA, has filed a charge sheet against 16 Khalistani separatists, including key members of Sikhs for Justice. The NIA has said that the Sikhs for Justice group is a frontal organization for Khalistan terrorist outfits, operating from foreign soil, including Pakistan. Armenian protesters blocked streets in the capital city of Yerevan, launching a civil disobedience campaign to force Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan to quit over the controversial peace agreement with Azerbaijan. Last week, 17 opposition parties said Pashinyan had until Monday to step down and proposed that former Prime Minister Yazgen Manoukian should take over. U.S. President-elect Joe Biden has named retired Army General Lloyd Austin as his pick to be Secretary of Defense and the first African-American to lead the Pentagon. The 67-year-old 4-star general was the U.S. commander in Iraq and head of the Central Command covering West Asia from 2010 to 2016. Bill Gates has lauded India's policies for financial innovation and inclusion. Speaking at the Singapore FinTech Festival, Gates said if people are going to study in one country right now other than China, it should be India, where innovation around the system is phenomenal. More than 60 envoys visited biotech companies Bharat Biotech and Biological E in Hyderabad in the Indian state of Telangana. They were invited by the Ministry of External Affairs to demonstrate India's production and delivery capacity of coronavirus vaccines. An explosion at a West Virginia chemical plant prompted authorities to order residents within 3 kilometers of the plant to remain indoors. The fire is believed to involve chlorinated dry bleach and methanol. The shelter-in-place order has now been lifted, and the fire is under control. Italian champions Juventus have topped Group G of the Champions League after a 3-0 win over Barcelona at the NOU camp. Footballing greats Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi renewed their legendary rivalry for the first time since 2018, and it was the Portuguese who came out on top. Ronaldo scored 2 penalties as Barca were dealt their first home defeat in Europe after 39 games. Elsewhere, Manchester United were knocked out after a 3-2 defeat to last season's semi-finalists RB Leipzig. Australian opener David Warner has been ruled out of the first test against India in Adelaide that begins next week. Warner suffered a groin strain during the second ODI against India and admits that despite making progress, he is still short of the fitness required to play a 5-day test. Head coach Justin Langer believes Warner will be ready for the second test on Boxing Day. Warner's replacement, Will Bukowski, is also a doubt for the series opener after suffering a mild concussion during the final day of the tour game against India.
It's been a difficult year for India's relationship with China. The virus from Wuhan was bad enough. Then came a military provocation, the worst border standoff in decades. 20 Indian soldiers died in action. It's been 8 months. 8 military-level talks have happened, but the standoff has not ended. China keeps promising de-escalation, but it does not pull its soldiers back. So for the first time this year, the government of India has launched a direct attack on Beijing. Until now, New Delhi was sticking to the diplomatic code of conduct. In public, the statements were non-confrontational. In private, the language was direct. India wanted the Chinese troops to withdraw. China has not listened. So today, Delhi spoke openly. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar says the India-China relationship has been significantly damaged this year and that it cannot be business as usual with China as long as the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, is on the border. Jaishankar was speaking to an American think tank where he shared the latest assessment on China and the border standoff.
Very differently brought tens of thousands of soldiers, in the full military preparation mode, right to the line of actual control in Ladakh. Now, naturally, the relationship would be profoundly disturbed by this. We've had 20 casualties out there. I think it has completely changed national sentiment as a result.
As Jaishankar said, China is in a major breach of bilateral agreements. The Chinese side has given 5 different explanations for this provocation, but it has failed to explain why it did not adhere to agreements, why it had to provoke India militarily and attack Indian soldiers. China has no answer for these questions. In fact, the provocations have not stopped. China has dispatched fighter aircraft and troops to a Pakistani airbase, and this is close to the Indian state of Gujarat. The deployment is for the Shaheen military exercise. So we have Chinese soldiers at the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh. And in the west, the Chinese are conducting a drill with Pakistan. Clearly, peace is not China's priority. China has not responded to the Indian minister's statement, but Russia has spoken on the border standoff. And this is an interesting assessment, we have to say, from a country that has been India's strategic ally and major arms supplier. Russia feels the West is engineering a split between Moscow and Delhi, ignoring the Chinese aggression. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Western powers are trying to engage India in a quote-unquote anti-China game. Listen to this.
For instance, India is subject to persistent, aggressive, devious Western policy, which tries to draw the country into anti-Chinese games, promoting so-called Indo-Pacific strategies. At the same time, Western policy tries to weaken our close partnership, strategic privileged relations with Indians. There is a very tough pressure undertaken by Americans on New Delhi concerning Indian military technical cooperation with Russia.
No prizes for guessing who Mr. Lavrov is talking about here. The United States of America. Russia has its own theory about the border standoff between India and China. In the statement, Sergei Lavrov referred to India as a quote-unquote clear pole in the world order. He says the West wants to weaken India's alliances with different global powers in order to maintain what he calls a unipolar world order. With those words, Moscow seems to have effectively given a clean chit to Beijing. At the same time, Sergei Lavrov has drawn the attention of the world to the great power game. This pandemic has shaken the world order. New alliances are taking shape. Russia, of course, does not want to lose an ally like India and a big arms market. So here's what we have. Global powers, Russia and the United States, vying for India's partnership. India will have to hedge its bets and make sure this rise does not come with a compromise. Like S. Jaishankar said, it cannot be business as usual with China. So a common rival brought Russia and China together, the United States. Russia may see China as a strategic partner, but for India, China is a threat, an aggressor, one that needs to be dealt with from a position of strength with deft diplomacy and a strong military. India's army chief is on a mission. He's traveling to West Asia to build a new defense partnership.
It's rare for the Indian Army chief to travel abroad. So when this tweet came out, it made headlines. General Naravane is the first army chief to visit the UAE and Saudi Arabia. It's a 6-day-long trip designed to create a military alliance with two Gulf powers. General Naravane will be starting from scratch since India's defense cooperation with the Gulf has been limited. The army chief could discuss the possibility of separate but regular joint military exercises with the two Gulf allies. In recent years, the Indian Navy has held drills with Gulf partners. In March 2018, India and the UAE conducted their maiden naval exercise Gulf Star 1. In 2019, India and Saudi Arabia announced their first joint naval drills. Reports say the Indian Army had scheduled exercises in the Gulf before, but they were delayed due to the outbreak of the Wuhan virus. General Naravane could use this opportunity to reschedule these drills. Joint production of defense equipment could be on the agenda too. Some reports have referred to the possibility of arms sales to the Gulf. The UAE and Saudi Arabia are reportedly interested in India's BrahMos missile. The Gulf could be a lucrative market for India to sell its indigenous defense tech. By March this year, Saudi arms imports increased by 130%, with the UAE accounting for almost 4% of the global arms deals. Both countries largely depend on the United States for weapons, but they have been scouting other suppliers too. The UAE is interested in equipping the Indian Army too. It is in talks with New Delhi to set up a Make in India route to supply carbines. UAE-based firm Caracal had won a contract 2 years ago. Reports say the deal is yet to be signed. The Army Chief's West Asia tour will irk Pakistan and the generals in Rawalpindi. Over the years, a number of Pakistani soldiers have been deputed to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. With the Pakistani military roped in the protection of the House of Saud. Now the Gulf powers are looking at India as a long-term security partner. General Naravani's visit to the Gulf comes at a significant time. The UAE and Bahrain have established diplomatic ties with Israel. The new partnerships open up possibilities for closer security cooperation with countries that are allies of India. New Delhi must make the most of this realignment. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The end of the Cold War brought about a new global order and the emergence of globalization. The world came closer with the World Wide Web, the lowering of trade barriers, the rise of transnational companies, a free market. 2020 saw the biggest disruption of this order. China under Xi Jinping exported the Wuhan virus and brought the world to a standstill. The pandemic exposed the shortcomings of global systems, how compromised they are. The pandemic forced a hard reset on the world, and it raised a question. Who will lead the post-pandemic world? Not the United States. Under Donald Trump, the US has all but abandoned the global leadership role. America withdrew from multilateral agreements and struggled to handle the pandemic. Joe Biden will have to pick up those pieces, heal a pandemic-crippled America before even thinking about global leadership. Then we have China. Beijing would love to play this role. It has the might, it has the money, but China will not lead the world because its record is too poor and its intentions too obvious. So we come back to the question, what kind of power equations will 2021 see? The post-pandemic world will be a multipolar world with multiple leaders as opposed to a single big player. What about India? What place will India have in this new world order? You see, the pandemic exposed a lack of global leadership, and India stepped in where it could. Despite challenges at home, which were many, India showed that it is capable of working for a global community. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi set up a response fund for ASEAN countries. India supplied emergency medicines to the United States, even to China in the beginning. India's Vande Bharat flights evacuated 1.2 lakh foreigners. As we speak, the world is leaning on India for vaccine manufacturing. India has promised to supply vaccines to some of the low and middle income countries, including neighbors Bangladesh and Nepal. India's Serum Institute has struck a deal with Gavi to supply vaccines to many countries. India already produces 60% of the developing world's vaccines. It is the world's leading vaccine manufacturer. During the pandemic, India not only engaged in health diplomacy, it also strengthened its strategic partnerships. India stood by France in its fight against Islamic radicalism. India also explored new avenues of cooperation with the Gulf countries. Prime Minister Modi called for the SAARC and G20 meetings. India engaged not only with the Quad countries but also reached out to its immediate neighborhood. As the world prepares for a new order, India is ready to claim its place. A continent-sized country with 1/6 of the world's population and a proven ability to lead the world during a crisis. The task before New Delhi now is to get its economy going. Aim for greater global outreach, develop stronger relations with like-minded countries, improve trade ties, improve tech ties, and get the dragon off its back, most important. To put it simply, India's strategy for leadership in the post-pandemic world will be to leverage the partnership model. And while we discuss the post-pandemic world, we must also be in touch with some current realities, like hunger so severe that people have been forced to eat sand. The island of Madagascar is on the brink of a humanitarian disaster. 3 years of drought and government neglect have turned the southern region of this country into barren land. There's nothing to grow. The rivers have gone dry. People have been forced to eat sand to survive. Let this report be a reminder of the grim reality of hunger which continues to plague not just Madagascar but several parts of the world.
400 kilometers from the African continent lies the island of Madagascar. The fourth biggest island in the world and the biggest in the Indian Ocean. It's famous for some breathtaking views of nature. White sand beaches, stunning rainforests, and these iconic trees known as the baobabs. But for all its natural beauty, this island of 27 million people is on the brink of a humanitarian disaster.
My children did not eat for 3 days and then died because I, their mother, did not manage to feed them.
In southern Madagascar, 3 straight years of drought accompanied by government neglect have led to widespread famine. Much of the land has become barren. The rivers have gone dry. Even the cacti have stopped producing fruit. The inhabitants dread a repeat of a terrible drought that killed hundreds in the 1990s. To prevent a similar misfortune, many are filling their empty stomachs with white clay mixed with tamarind. They call it survival soil, as it allows the acidic taste of tamarind to seep into their mouths and stave off hunger.
If we had something to eat, if our saliva was enough, we would never have eaten that. But it's true that we didn't know that white clay was edible before. We tried to mix it and it worked.
The children struggle to digest the clay. Most of them end up with swollen bellies. Their wilted skin, lean legs and malnourished bodies attest to the grueling conditions that prevail in the region. According to the World Food Programme, half of the population in this region is in need of emergency food aid. They say around 31 million euros are urgently needed to feed at least 1.5 million people. The figures get dwarfed when placed in the Global Hunger Index. According to the Global Hunger Index for 2020, nearly 690 million people are undernourished, most of them being children. 144 million children reportedly suffer from stunting, a sign of chronic undernutrition. 47 million children suffer from wasting, a sign again of acute undernutrition. And in 2018, 5.3 million children died before their 5th birthdays. As per the GHI scores, the 3 countries that have alarming levels of hunger are Chad, Timor-Leste and Madagascar. India was placed on the 94th position out of a list of 107 countries. Yes, at least 107 countries are battling widespread hunger. A key factor behind this huge figure is the unprecedented level of inequality in these countries. According to the World Social Report, the wealth gap for more than 70% of the global population is widening. The UN says the average income in North America is 16 times higher than that of people in sub-Saharan Africa. The driving factors for this gap are mainly technological innovation, climate change, urbanization, and international migration. The world is far from the goal of equal opportunity for all. The sand eaters of Madagascar are only a reminder of this grim reality. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Here is another grim reality. Not everyone may get a Wuhan virus vaccine. Rich countries are hoarding the shots. The poor nations may be at their mercy for supplies. 9 out of 10 people in almost 70 poor countries may not get the shot. Let me repeat that and listen to this carefully. 9 out of 10 people in 70 countries, no vaccine for them just yet. This is the estimate of an alliance of rights groups. For the poor, the vaccine is still far, far away, because rich countries have grabbed 53% of the world's supply already. This is even before the doses have been produced. They've been pre-booked. Consider these numbers. Let's begin with the United States. It has secured access to 2.6 billion doses. The United States only has 331 million people, 2.6 billion doses. The European Union has secured 2 billion doses, population 447 million. The United Kingdom, it has booked 507 million doses, again, much higher than the population. Canada, 414 million. Japan, 290 million. So this is what it comes down to. Wealthy countries with enough doses vaccinate their entire population at least 3 times over. Most vaccines need to be administered only twice. So even if the people in the developed world get their 2 shots, there will be enough doses to spare. The United States, with its 2 billion doses, can give 3 shots to every citizen. Canada has almost 10 shots per citizen. Britain and Australia, 5 shots for each individual. The European Union, almost 2 doses for every single person who's there. More than enough, and for everyone. But clearly not for the poor in other countries. It might take several months, perhaps even years, for them to get a shot. Poor nations are then depending on COVAX, a joint alliance, led by Gavi, an international organization that works on vaccine access. Poorer nations are hoping to get some supplies from COVAX, but there are few supplies to go around. Let me give you more figures. The United States has access to more than 2 billion doses for a population of around 328 million. It's under no obligation to share its vaccine supplies with anyone. They have paid money for all these vaccines and doses. How much vaccine does COVAX have? How many doses? So far, it has managed to secure 700 million doses. And this has to be distributed among 3.6 billion people across 92 lower and middle income countries. COVAX is hopelessly short. Poor countries will have to widen the net, and they're looking at India for vaccine that is cheap and effective. And this is something that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has placed his emphasis on. Some options are already on the table, like the Oxford vaccine. India's Serum Institute plans to supply COVAX with Oxford shots. Why is this significant? Because of the cost. According to reports, the Oxford vaccine would be sold to the government of India for $3 to $4 per dose. For perspective, the Pfizer shot that is now being given to British citizens was sold at $20 per dose. $3 to $4 versus $20. You see the difference. If the Oxford vaccine works, it will be a good option for the poorer countries. And already its makers have promised to sell the shot at cost price to the developing world.
Worked on diseases in global health for a while, and it's often the low middle income countries who are neglected, and they should have good vaccines too. It shouldn't just be the high income countries who can pay for them. But apart from wanting equity across the world, if we don't have the vaccine available in many countries, and we just protect a small number of them, then we can't go back to normal, because the virus is going to keep coming back and causing problems again.
She's right. The virus will keep coming back until we have enough vaccine shots to cover everyone. India is one of the leading vaccine makers in the world. It is in a position to take up this challenge to fill the gap in global supplies. And Delhi has given every indication that it is up to the task. Meanwhile, in Sri Lanka, predatory Chinese investments continue. After ports and road projects, Sri Lanka has now allowed Chinese investments into manufacturing. A $300 million Chinese tyre factory is being set up adjacent to the Hambantota port. China's Shandong Huahua a tyre company, will export 80% of the production. Our next report tells you more.
The 6th of June 2012. The Hambantota port officially begins transshipment operations. The construction cost of Phase 1 of the project is estimated to be $361 million. The Exim Bank of China funds 85% of the total cost. By 2017, the port begins incurring heavy losses. Debt repayment becomes difficult. The Sri Lankan government, led by Ranil Wickremesinghe, decides to lease 70% of the port to a Chinese venture for 99 years. With this deal, not only does Colombo get caught in a debt trap, it also gives Beijing a strategic foothold along a crucial waterway. 3 years and many more debt traps later, there is no stopping predatory Chinese investments on the island nation. Sri Lanka has announced the first large-scale Chinese investment in manufacturing. The Sri Lankan cabinet has approved the setting up of a tyre factory with tax concessions for the Chinese. The factory will be adjacent to the Hambantota port. China-based Shandong Heohua Tyres Limited will export at least 80% of the production. The announcement comes weeks after the Rajapaksa government unveiled its budget for 2021. The budget primarily banks on a huge Chinese real estate development across the country. This is despite the fact that the country already has a lot of debts to repay. In March this year, China gave Sri Lanka an urgent loan of $500 million as pandemic support. Then, Sri Lankan lawmakers approved a decision to borrow $80 million more for road projects. Now, with China investing in Sri Lanka's manufacturing sector, Sri Lanka is growing more and more vulnerable to a bigger Chinese takeover. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Meanwhile, China is still fighting its Muslims. The Communist Party's war against Xinjiang continues to touch new lows every day. And now they're armed with technology. China's comrade in arms in this repression is telecom giant Huawei. Let me start from the beginning. The New York-based Human Rights Watch has released an exhaustive report on China's repression of Uyghurs. The report talks about China's use of technology in repression. It reveals how the Chinese regime is using big data to arbitrarily detain Uyghur Muslims. How does this work? Through a predictive computer program called the IJOP, Integrated Joint Operations Platform, IJOP. This program analyzes data and selects members of minority communities to be detained. It uses various surveillance systems which have been placed all across Xinjiang, like facial recognition systems, iris scanners. With the help of these systems, the software automatically selects Uyghurs that may be potentially threatening. That's something that the system decides, who can be a potential threat. And once someone has been identified as a potential threat, the system flags their details to Chinese officials. And these officials then evaluate these individuals based on their activities. And then they're sent to what China calls re-education camps. Now here's a question. On what basis does the program select detainees? Who is flagged? On the basis of their behavior, their interactions, the places they visit. People are mapped, you see. There are links to foreign countries, sometimes something as small as a phone call from a foreign number. A phone call, as simple as that. The program notes the precise duration of the calls. Who you're talking to can make you a suspect. According to the report, one Uyghur woman was detained for a prolonged phone call with a sister who lives outside China. That was all that she did wrong. Make a phone call to her sister. This program even flags people for everyday lawful and non-violent behavior. So how is Huawei involved in this? According to IPVM, a video surveillance company, Huawei worked along with Megvii, which is China's largest artificial intelligence company, to test and validate Uyghur alarms. a facial recognition program used to track Uyghur Muslims, to guess their age and to figure out their details. The program sent out an alarm to the Chinese authorities every time it pinpointed someone from the minority group. Huawei was snooping for the government, that's what it means. Huawei provided these servers with storage, network equipment, cloud platforms, cameras, software, hardware, everything to get the program running. The same facial recognition software is being used to integrate, used in this IJOP, the Integrate Joint Operations Program. This was all mentioned on an internal company document signed by Huawei representatives in 2018. The document also existed on Huawei's website, but it was removed as soon as this report was released. So now we can confirm two things. China is using big data to oppress Uyghur Muslims, and Huawei, a telecom giant banned by several countries now, India not included, is working hand in glove with the Chinese regime in oppressing its own people. Ethiopia's federal government is inching closer to a victory in Tigray. The local militia are on the defensive. But how is victory coming so easily for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed? Is he getting help from a neighbor, a long-time foe who recently joined hands? Here's a report.
Ethiopia's war within is becoming a regional conflict. Neighboring countries are taking sides. Eritrea, a former foe, is assisting Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. It is sending soldiers to battle the local militia in Tigray. Diplomats stationed in the region stand by this account, but officially both sides have denied Eritrean involvement. Until recently, Ethiopia and Eritrea were sworn enemies. In 2018, they signed a peace deal, putting a two-decade conflict to rest. Abiy Ahmed was the architect of this peace. A Nobel Peace Prize soon followed. Today, the two governments are closer than ever, thanks to a mutual foe, the Tigray People's Liberation Front.
We expect the government to do more in terms of its military operation, because remember, the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has promised to the people of Ethiopia that he's going to soon, he used the word very soon, to end this military operation. He needs to show that, because if we're seeing the TPLF still possessing missiles, and yet the government said that they had already disarmed them of these missiles, or the missiles were not there, then that means the citizens on the other side might start questioning the authenticity of what the government is saying.
The evidence is mounting against Eritrea. Satellite images show their troops and artillery across the border. Eyewitness accounts put Eritrean troops on the battlefield. As one US official put it, the Eritreans are in Tigray, but they aren't saying it publicly. But what sort of deployment are we looking at? A senior diplomat put the numbers in thousands. A former Eritrean defense minister went a step further. He says his country has deployed 4 mechanized divisions, 7 infantry divisions, and a commando brigade in Tigray. The Eritrean soldiers are proving to be an unruly lot. On Sunday, they accosted a United Nations team in Tigray. The UN officials were fired at and detained. But Ethiopian authorities defended the soldiers, pinning the blame on the UN officials.
So they were told in some of areas they were not supposed to move. But they indulged themselves to kind of adventurous expedition. They broke 2 checkpoints to drive hastily to areas where they were not supposed to go, that they were told not to go. So they were left alone when they broke 2 checkpoints, and then when they were about to break the 3rd one, they were shot at and detained.
Eritrea's involvement puts the international community in a tight spot. Ethiopia is a key ally of the West. It is crucial to maintaining peace in the Horn of Africa. Eritrea, not so much. The Eritrean regime is infamous for human rights violations. So while the global community has tolerated the operations in Tigray, Eritrean involvement could prove to be a red line. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Let's zoom out of Ethiopia and you will see that there is a global anti-terror drive. In Europe, France and Italy have moved against radical Islam. New Zealand is fighting far-right extremism. On the 8th of December, it called for sweeping changes to counter terrorism operations. The suggestion was put forward by those probing the Christchurch massacre. Less than 24 hours later, Australia has jumped on board. It has ordered an inquiry into combating violent extremism. A parliamentary committee in Australia has announced that it will examine the spread of radical movements across the country. It comes on a day when Australia arrested an 18-year-old who was researching bomb making. Authorities say this teenager was accessing quote-unquote neo-Nazi, white supremacist and anti-Semitic material online. Have you wondered what drives such behavior? Australia's far-right radicalism is not really unique. It is centralized around neo-Nazism, anti-immigration, Islamophobia, preservation of Western values and cultural purity. Far-right-leaning Australians believe that white identity is under threat. For the longest time, such extremism went unchecked because Australia narrowed its anti-terror drives to just Islamist groups. But the Christchurch attack across the border forced Canberra to change direction. The terrorist, remember, was an Australian. And Canberra realized that it was only a matter of time before terror struck home. In October this year, a study funded by the Government of New South Wales identified 30 Australian right-wing extremist group pages on Facebook, 30. It also earmarked more than 37,000 tweets and 3,000 users. Researchers said these extremist groups were quote-unquote appropriating conservative politics and appropriating Trumpism to expose potential recruits to their narratives. The challenge before Australia is to act before extremism online spills offline in the form of violence. In September this year, the country's intelligence officials said that white supremacist extremism, listen to this, white supremacist extremism accounts for 40% of their counter-terrorism caseload. 4 years back, that number was only 15%. You see how it has risen. Cracking down on white supremacy will not be easy for Australia. Experts point out that several Australian leaders do not have an appetite to deal with this problem. And guess what? They're right. In October this year, Australia's domestic spy agency was criticised for using the term right-wing while referring to extremism. One senator said that it caused unnecessary anxiety and could offend conservatives. 2 months on, Australia's Home Affairs Minister wants to broaden the probe on white terror to include Islamist groups. Canberra has two options. Either it diffuses a ticking time bomb, or lets it blow up and kill its own. Football saw yet another ugly incident last night. A referee allegedly used a racist term towards a coach during the Champions League match between PSG and a Turkish team. Players from both teams stood firm and walked off the pitch together. Our next report tells you more.
On paper, it was a match of huge significance. With French champions and last season's finalists, Paris Saint-Germain taking on Turkish champions Istanbul Başakşehir at the Parc des Princes in Paris. But just 14 minutes in, controversy struck. Istanbul's assistant coach Pierre Ribaud was shown a red card for protesting an on-field refereeing incident. And it sparked a chain of events that saw both teams walk off together. Cameroonian Ribaud was incensed as he blamed the fourth official, Romanian Sebastian Coltescu, for using a racist slur against him. Coltescu is alleged to have referred to Ribaud as the black one in his communications with the on-field referee, who was also Romanian. And the word for black in the native language is negru. In a remarkable show of unity, both teams walked off the pitch in protest and asked for the Romanian to be removed. When that didn't happen, Istanbul refused to return to the ground, and the match was abandoned after 2 hours of waiting. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan attempted to use the incident to make a political point.
The event that took place at the Başakşehir PSG match in Paris, I think it was at the 13th or 14th minute, is truly a new expression of France's racist approaches, racist rhetoric. This approach is never forgivable. Unfortunately, France has become a place where racist approaches and racist rhetoric have intensified. Our hope is that tonight's match ends with calm, so we can continue our path the same way.
But no French official was involved in the match due to PSG's participation. And PSG superstars Neymar Jr. and Kylian Mbappe led the denouncement of the alleged incident. European football's governing body UEFA has ordered an investigation, and the match will resume later this evening with a new set of officials. Racist incidents in football have seen a marked increase over the last few years, especially with unruly fans targeting black players. But this is the first time a referee has been accused of racism. Former England captain Rio Ferdinand called on footballing bodies to take urgent action. Ferdinand said, and I quote, "We're at a disturbing tipping point. We've got Millwall, the PSG game today, all in the same week. Not a week goes by at the moment without an incident involving race. We're at the point now where something needs to be done. We're saying it all of the time, but the powers that be within this game need to make a huge stand." Ironically, this latest episode comes at a time when sports stars are using their global appeal to take a stand and draw attention to the Black Lives Matter movement. Be it Lewis Hamilton in Formula 1, Naomi Osaka in tennis, or NBA players who were lauded by Pope Francis himself for their stand against racial injustice and police brutality last month. Football is a multicultural sport, and that has led to many high-profile incidents. Manchester United forward Edinson Cavani is facing a ban for using a culturally insensitive term on social media a few weeks ago. Footballers have walked off in the past and will continue to do so if they suffer abuse or racist slurs. But it won't end till a respect for all cultures is inculcated among everyone playing sport and administering it. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.